This is the story of baby Sergius and his labor and birth. He was actually born on the feast day of the elevation of the cross. He will get to celebrate his birthday on the same day as the feast day every single year of his life. I think that's incredibly special. On Tuesday, he was about 40 weeks and a couple of days, and I didn't want to get medically induced, so I tried natural inductions. And before then, I was doing, by the 37-week mark, I started eating dates, 3 a day of the big chunky dates, and I was taking red raspberry leaf tea. On that Tuesday night, I decided to use my breast pump and do a bit of nipple stimulation in the hopes of starting my labor. I actually wanted to have a natural, truly spontaneous labor, but I was getting to the point where if I went to another OBGYN appointment and I heard you need to get medically induced, I just didn't want that to be part of my labor and delivery. I did it around 8:30 p.m. and then I went to bed at 10:30-ish. I was feeling a bit weird by the time I went to bed. I remember thinking that I didn't really want to go to sleep, but that I should. I was, prior to that day, I was trying to sleep on a pretty consistent schedule of sleep at or around 9 p.m. so that I would get a good chunk of sleep before my other baby woke up for feeding. So I went to bed with a sore belly area. My belly area was pretty sore. And then at 11:30-ish, I got up to pee, as I usually do. And then when I lay back down, I was feeling a constant soreness in the lower portion of my belly. And I was also feeling these spazzy, trembling sensations in my belly that just continued and over and over and over. And then all of a sudden there was this sharp pain, like what are those called? Not contraction pains, even though obviously that's what they were, but menstrual cramp, but like the sharp, like knife in your belly kind of pain. So I felt that, and then I got up to pee once more. And then when I lay back down from using the restroom, I noticed that the trembling sensations and the twitching in my belly had stopped. And but there was steady something going on. There was something repetitive going on that didn't really hurt, but it was constant, and it wasn't the tremblies, it was something else. And then by the time that 12:44 rolled around, midnight, I was pretty sure that I was in labor and having contractions regularly. And it was like pressure that started in my upper tummy and extended all the way down to where the cervix would be. Around 1:40, I got up, and during all this time, I could not find rest. I could not sleep at all. And I just couldn't go to sleep at all. So at 1:41, I got up and I pooped. And then I laid back down, and at 2:40, I had to get up again and poop again. Thankfully, all the poops that I had were super easy. They just slid right out. And then around 3:10, I had crazy diarrhea. Like I just stayed in the toilet, pooping, full evacuation. Thank the Lord that my colon just fully evacuated, and I stayed in the toilet for a long time, and I had several contractions in the toilet. And then in the toilet, I actually found that if I were to move my body, like sway my body on the toilet, the contractions would feel not like bad. At 4:30, the contractions started getting more and more intense. They picked up the intensity, but they also seemed to me like they were getting further apart, so they were spaced out further. And then at 5, I had to poop some more. So I'm posting consistent. So I laid down, and then I got back up, and I thought, well, if the contractions are getting spaced out, I might as well just, instead of trying to lay back down in the bed, which I have been doing since pretty much 10, I decided that at that point at 5, I would just get up and start my day like regular day. And I have a laboring vlog that you guys can see of me just going about doing household things. At this point, like, the contractions were so spaced out that I was like, maybe this is gonna take a really long time, because it's just so spread out at this point. And I was hoping that if I got up from the bed, then the contractions would start picking up. And then at 5:58, I had another poop, super smelly. And then at 6:25, I noticed that I needed to throw up. At this stage, my husband woke up and my son woke up. My toddler woke up. So, and I told him that I was in labor. Of course, I told my husband, and he was like, "You've been laboring?" And I said, "Yeah, I've been laboring the whole night pretty much." So at this point, we decide to get me in the shower, and I took a bath and had several strong contractions in the bath. Around 7:31, I called the doctors because my husband was watching me do all these things throughout the morning, and he said to me, he was like, "Hey, maybe you should time these contractions, because to me it seems like they're getting really, really close." And I thought that it was going to take a really long time for me to have really close contractions, so I wasn't even timing my contractions at this point. I knew that the level of intensity was picking up and that I was having contractions regularly because I was up and about and doing stuff around the house. However, he was the one who noticed how frequently and how close together they were. And I started timing the contractions, and as soon as I started timing those contractions, my app immediately, gives me the alert to go to the hospital. And I was like, what? It hasn't even been an hour since I've been timing these contractions. It's just been a couple of minutes. But the app I kept swiping the notification away and timing the contractions, and the app kept being like, go to the hospital, boop, go to the hospital. So I was like, okay. The app said they were about 2 to 3 minutes apart, those contractions. And at that point, I had to stop and breathe through the contractions. And the contractions this time around didn't feel like I was losing myself. It felt like very centering and I was very focused on God and asking God to give me strength to get through that contraction, because it was very strong sensation. I wouldn't call it pain. It wasn't necessarily painful, even though it felt like a stronger menstrual cramp. I had to lay down, and I tried the Bradley method of you know, the relaxation pose that they teach in the Bradley class and they teach in the book. And those were actually more painful, strangely enough. They were more painful and more spread out. Those contractions that I timed while I was in bed lasted, or the frequency was within 5 minutes from each other instead of the 2 to 3 minutes from each other when I was standing up. So I thought, I'm gonna stay in this bed because the contractions, even though they are stronger, they're more spread out, and I don't want to have this baby while I'm on my way to the hospital. So I want my contractions to be more spread out. And I called the doctors, their clinic, and they were like, oh, it seems like you're doing fine. If you want to come in, you can, but you can labor more at home. And thank God that I chose to go into the hospital, because my son was born at 10 a.m. just barely after we arrived at the hospital. So I told my husband that we needed to go to the hospital immediately, and I just stayed in bed, and he got a neighbor to come over and watch our son. We had a church friend come over, but she was very far away, so she had to travel to get here. So she was on her way, but it was going to take a long time for her to get here. So my husband thankfully was able to reach one of our neighbors, and she came over here in the meantime to watch my son. And we booked out of the house, and my husband was thankfully able to pack everything super quick and put everything into the car. And then we arrived at the hospital. It was around like 9. I don't have true record of that, the timing for that, but we arrived at the hospital. The contractions in the car that I experienced were among the hardest. And even still, I wouldn't say that they were painful. They were just, it took a lot of energy and focus for me to just fix my whole being and soul on God. And it was just a very strong conversation that I was having with God to grant me strength to get through the birth. Because I recognized that I could not do it without his help. So I just kept asking him whenever the contractions picked up. I would ask him for strength, and then when they came down, I would relax into the seat. And I was in the back seat at this point because I didn't want to be in the front seat strapped. So I labored in the back seat on my knees. So we arrived at the hospital, and it was around either 8:30 or 9 a.m. And they see me there, and they're like, oh, let's take you into triage. So they took me into triage, and I was hoping that they would just take me to a labor and delivery room, but they took me into triage, and in came the nurse midwife, and she's like, well, I have to check you. And I did not want any vaginal checks at all. That was part of my plan. But since my waters hadn't had broken at that point, and because she was so pushy about the fact that she couldn't admit me if she didn't check me, I just unfortunately gave in and said, sure, you can check me. That is fine. I just want to be admitted and brought into a room. And that honestly, like, I didn't care for that specific kind of treatment because I didn't want to be checked at all. Like, I just wanted labor to progress normally and naturally. and it was so clear that I was in labor. She kept saying that she couldn't admit me due to the fact that she did not know if I was in labor or not. But I was having literally back-to-back contractions at this point. I feel like I was in transition during that point, and I was laboring in front of her eyes, and she was like, I can't admit you into a room. So I just stared at her and I was like, are you serious? Are you serious? So I gave in. That's not great. It's not great to be pushed into giving up your rights to your body. But she shook me and she was like, oh, you have, you're 9 centimeters dilated and you have bulging waters. And I was like, cool. Are you gonna admit me now? And they admitted me. They wheeled me into the room. I got into the bed and I started laboring in bed. By this point that they admitted me and I got into the bed, I was feeling like pushy, not to the point where I was pushing, but I felt that sensation of, oh, so I was feeling the urges starting to pick up to push, and I was on all fours hanging onto the bed, and that's the position that I had chosen prior. Thank the Lord that I chose that position because it made the contractions a lot easier. Unfortunately, they had to put like the continuous fetal monitoring and some other monitor, and I told them that I didn't want that, but they were like, we need that because your baby had a deceleration in triage. So I was like, oh, okay, I don't want to fight during these contractions because I need to focus on these contractions and getting through them. So I was like, fine, just keep checking, keep monitoring. That is totally fine, even though the baby's been fine. So I started feeling more and more of those pushing sensations. And then there was this very, I don't want to say rude doctor that came in to want to check me again vaginally, but she came in and she was like, oh, you need to be checked. And at this point I was like grunting and pushing, but not full force pushing, but I felt some stuff happening, and some pressure. And this lady, she's like, I need to check you. And I'm like, no, you don't need to check me. You don't need to check me. Like, I am doing just fine on my own, laboring. Don't check me. And I don't know why she needed to check me. I really don't, but she seemed to have gotten a little upset and she just walked off, and that was the last time I saw of her, like throughout my stay in the hospital. But this lady was like kind of rude. She just came in. I don't think she even like told me her name, but she might have, but I was like in my own world. But she just was like, I need to check you. I don't know what is the obsession with checking. I don't know what the obsession is, but yeah, it's not good. It's not good at all. I remember going to the restroom with my husband and he just looked at me like, oh my gosh, what is happening? And I just looked at him like, yeah, it's very weird that they keep pushing these like checks and stuff on me. Then I went back in the bed after I had peed, and then it got like even more intense, and I started grunting and kind of like screaming, even though I was not in pain, like not in pain at all. Like I would not consider my labor to be a painful labor. And my husband was really good at telling me this is pressure, not pain. And that helped a lot. And it helped a lot that he kept centering me on God, and having me like be focused on God. And I think that that's really, really impactful. And like, it was so good. It was such a good labor. So I started feeling intense pressure, and it actually like almost felt good, that pressure that I was feeling, because I felt like, yes, things are happening, things are like he's coming. And I like was screaming and grunting and like making all sorts of noises, but I did not feel like I was in pain. I felt like my body was just making those noises to like release the tension, release everything. And then I felt the burning sensation, the ring of fire, and he came out within a couple of pushes. All the nurses that were there were so nice and so hands off. I absolutely loved the nurses that were attending the birth. They were so like amazing nurses. And I pushed him out. I was on like not all fours. I was just leaning against the headboard. There was a nurse. She was so sweet. She wanted to help me with a peanut ball so that I could rest my hands and not be like attached, and be more comfortable. But by the time she had brought me the peanut ball, I had already almost pushed him out. So, and I couldn't, I couldn't do anything other than hold on for dear life. So once I pushed him out, I literally like stayed in my position for a good bit of time, like a couple of minutes, just gathering myself up. And one of the nurses that was there was like, hey, like, can you turn around? And so we can like, check you and stuff. I was like, oh, okay. And then I met my baby, and he was brought to me and put on my chest. And I just like remember this explosion of happiness. Just, it felt so good to see him and to hold him after all these months of having him in my stomach. It felt so good. I felt this rush of just pure happiness. And yeah, like that was the labor and birth story of my son, my second son, Sergius, baby boy. And I unfortunately wanted to go home like immediately, but due to insurance and due to just stuff happening, I had to stay a night in the hospital. There was no complications. It was just based on insurance policies and making sure that my birth was covered, because they were concerned that my birth wasn't going to be covered if they discharged me, because they needed me to stay there a whole night apparently. Otherwise I would have been discharged without medical advice, or whatever it's called, but like dishonorably discharged almost. So I wanted to make sure that my insurance covered the birth. But next time around, I'm just gonna have a home birth, because the experience, while it was really nice, the experience of being in the car and driving somewhere while in labor was the absolute worst. And having to deal with certain things in the hospital was really rough. And like, I don't know, at midnight that night, there was a nurse that came into my room and she needed to check my blood pressure, but I was asleep. And she just called my name, and she was in the room, and she startled me so badly out of sleep. Like, my heart was like going so fast. So it's just things that I don't understand. Like, if you want mothers to rest, and if you, like, I don't know, I just don't care for the hospital experience, because it's silly to be hospitalized for a vaginal birth that is normal. So next time I have a baby, they're gonna be born in the house. I hope you all enjoyed that labor and birth story. If you have any questions, do let me know. It was definitely different than baby Sosima's birth. And I love them both, but this one was definitely a beautiful conversation with God. And my husband was able to be there for me from almost beginning to end, almost. But he was there for me throughout, and he helped me stay focused. And that was a big, big help for me. All right. Have a great day. Bye.